And we are live, and I want to welcome Mark Baker from Baker's Green Acres. We're going to be talking about how anybody can farm and homesteading as a solution to America's food crisis. And with that, hey, Mark, man, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jack. Thanks for having me on. Long time
Excellent,
fan.
man. Thank you for coming. Real quick before Mark and I start, guys, just you'll notice on your screen right there, we will never contact you for any personal information or private chat, etc. in the video comments. Just because you see my logo does not mean it's me. In fact, it probably isn't. There's a lot of people running scams in the comments, Instagram, Twitter, everywhere, fake accounts. Please don't fall for it. You want to talk to me, you do that by email. I'm sure Mark will tell you how to talk to him, but I don't want anybody getting scammed, and these platforms don't care about you, so please care for yourself. With that, Mark, hey, man, we were shooting the breeze a little bit before we went live. Let's take it back to, like, you mentioned you served some time in the military. I did that as well, nowhere near as long as you. But how do you go from there? Like, I guess after that, you go into homesteading, and next thing you know, you're farming. How does that journey happen?
Well, I was still active duty. My wife and I moved off the base, and we got a house that had been a farm. And
Okay.
They had parted off everything but the farmhouse and a barn. And so we moved there because we just wanted to be away from the base. This is my last about 6 years active duty. And then I came home one day with some chickens. And then it got worse from there. I just kept doing things like that. And I was working away from the base. So I would be at work for about 3 days, and then I'd be off for like 4 or 5 days. So I had time. And I really started liking that whole animal thing, and just being able to utilize my skills to do fun things. That's how it started.
And then so that leads eventually, like, the chicken is the gateway drug to farming and ranching then?
Yeah. Well, during that 6-year period that I was at my last duty assignment, a couple of things happened. There was a slaughter plant near us that burnt down. And the guy that I was using to slaughter my pigs, he says, well, you're going to have to do it by yourself. I can help you. I'll show you what I know. And so that began my slaughtering career. And, I started figuring out that it was easier to just do stuff myself than to have other people help me. So I'm that way. I like to do things myself. And the different processes interest me. So then I retired from the Air Force, and we moved to Michigan and found a farm right away. At that time in 2004, farming wasn't chic then. It was like, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
And but I was doing it for my own family's health and welfare, and we like to work together, and I didn't particularly want to work for the machine anymore. I always knew I could go back to the machine, and I mean like the military complex, but I didn't want to do it as my first option coming out of the military.
Yeah, there is always that temptation to go the GS route after 20 years. It's always a way to do it if you really want to, but often people don't want to. And I'd say that's probably more true now than it was 15, 20 years ago. The first time I heard of Baker's Green Acres was years and years ago. There may be some people in this audience been around long enough to remember it, but I got an email telling me that some dude's farm was raided by a SWAT team over pigs. And I get a lot of stuff, and half of it's true and half of it's some half-baked crazy shit. And I immediately went, this is probably some half-baked crazy shit.
Yeah.
But I always checked, and I'm like, no, wait a minute. This dude's farm got raided because his pigs are the wrong color. Can you kind of walk us through that? Because this was a lot longer of a battle, I think, than people realize, because you basically won it personally eventually, and you were like, that's not really good enough. You don't get to start this to the state. The state basically started a fight and then ran away from it when it didn't start going their way. Can you kind of walk us through how that all happened?
Sure. Yeah, it wasn't quite as dramatic. There was no SWAT team exactly.
Yeah.
But it started in December. It started for me anyway in December of 2011. I was making a delivery. Okay, so we're an 80-acre general purpose farm. We do pigs, we do cattle, we milk some cows, we raise a lot of chickens in the summertime, ducks, mushrooms, biochar, all that stuff. And we were doing pretty good with it. I was making a delivery to one of my restaurants, and this is in Michigan here. And the guy says, "Hey, didn't you hear? These pigs are illegal now." And the pigs that we were raising were, they're called Mangalitsa. We had imported them from Austria. It cost a lot of money to bring in the country and all that stuff. And so I said, no, that can't be. This is the restaurant owner that's saying this.
Yeah.
And he says, "Oh, well, you better check with so-and-so because I was just briefed on this at the university. And sure enough, they're illegal." So I looked into it, and the Department of Natural Resources had made a declaration. They made a declaration. This is a department making a declaration. And this is where we were as a society. We thought, those guys don't make law,
Yeah.
We thought. Yeah. And so they made a declaration, and it filtered down through the ranks. And they said, we're trying to combat feral swine. And we're doing that by telling all the farmers they have to dispossess their pigs because those pigs could become feral. And, like where you are in Texas, feral pigs, for some people it's a problem. For other people, it's a living.
They're delicious.
But the Department of Agriculture was trying to say that here in Michigan, feral pigs can do all kinds of terrible things, and they can,
fly through the air,
babies.
shoot laser beams out of their eyes.
Yeah. They steal cars, for goodness
rob
sake.
banks,
Right.
Counterfeit money. Oh wait, that's the government anyway.
Okay, but when it came to them to talk to me personally, their argument didn't make any sense, and I said, no, let me bring you up to speed. First of all, you guys don't know what the word feral means, because how could my pigs be feral because they're behind fences? Yeah. And you would think that I had insulted their wife or something, because they got so upset that I had the nerve to question them. And so my fur kind of went up a little bit, and their fur went. And so it just became this, you do it now. And I said, I'm not going to do it ever. And you can't make me. And then I, hired a lawyer, and then they kind of took me a different direction. And, I had taken an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. And, it said in the Constitution, in the Fifth Amendment, that my life, liberty, and property is protected under due process of law. And last I checked, Department of Natural Resources doesn't make law. No. So I kind of figured from being in the military that if they could arrest me, then they would have just done it. They wouldn't threaten me. And they threatened me with a huge fine. They said $10,000 per animal. I had 70 pigs at the time. So I got it in writing from the Attorney General, $700,000 fine that they were seeking against me. They threatened me with arrest. They threatened to put my children in state custody. And that just, they can never back down from that. That once you cross that line, you've made an enemy for life. And I will never forget that. But anyway, it took 3 years. I went through 3 lawyers. We finally came to within 10 days of our court case, which the Department of Natural Resources lawyers would have had to argue in front of God and country and the jury that a pig with a straight tail or a curly tail is a feral pig, and that I was breaking their rules. And anyway, they were going to lose for sure.
Yeah.
And it was going to set precedents, which it did anyway, because I'm not letting it go.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They started the fight.
Yeah.
You engaged in the fight. They got to the point where they're going to get their ass beat in the fight, and then they tried to run away.
Exactly.
And you were like, no, this is bigger than me at this point. I don't freaking think so.
Exactly. And then they 10 days prior to our court case, they moved for dismissal, and they just basically forfeited the game. And so we won by default. But I can't say that it was all me. There was people from across the nation that helped us with legal fees. We had to have a lobbyist, or at least we felt we did at that time, because we didn't know how to navigate the legal system. We didn't know how to navigate like our senators and our state representatives. You know, I'd come out of the military, and my whole time in for 20 years. I thought that I was coming back to the real world.
Yeah.
Where, you know, our senators, like, they care about us. They're there to fight for us and all. And even all the way through the struggle, I just thought there must be something wrong with me, because this lawyer seems to be doing things that are counterproductive to this case. That couldn't be, you know?
Yeah.
So I had come out of the military, actually was the real world, because we had a real world mission. And if we didn't do our jobs right and our bosses didn't do their jobs, they got fired instantly. And, you know, so anyway, we won that case. And along the way, I gleaned a whole lot of information about how stuff really works, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and to sum it up, basically what they were saying is your pigs are in danger because of their appearance. So if you had just said, fine, I'll get rid of all these heritage breed hogs and bring in, you know, pink pigs and ran everything the same way, that would have been fine, because everybody knows domestic pigs don't go feral. Right. Which is, I've shot a lot of pigs, by the way, Mark, that are kind of pink and kind of gray and white. And like, we shoot feral hogs all the time here in Texas that look pretty damn domestic. And they do start to drift pretty quick as they interbreed with the other ferals. But I've shot some pigs that look like they came right off somebody's farm. I'm just saying. And their tails are straight.
Well, one of the things people might remember from this, and I finally figured out what it was, they came out with a declaration. They called it the declaratory ruling. And like for farmers, it's like, oh, it was on a state letterhead.
Oh,
real official. Had a lot of words in there that us dumb farmers don't understand. But they had a list of 9 characteristics. And if your pig had even one of those characteristics, they said your pig is feral. That didn't make any sense to me.
No.
But that's, and the characteristics, get this, you might remember this. It was like any pig that has a curly tail.
Yeah.
Any pig that has a straight tail.
Yeah.
Any pig that has floppy ears.
Yeah.
Any pig with erect ears. And then it got even better. It was like any pig with a distinct skeletal structure. And that was it. There was no qualifiers.
Yeah.
They didn't tell you how distinct. And then there was several others, coloration. And then number 9 was my personal favorite. And this makes a whole bunch of sense now. It said, other characteristics not currently known to the scientific community.
Oh,
trust the science
community. Man. Wow.
We're bringing scientists in, right?
Science.
So what I have determined that is it's like a spell. It's almost like a witchcraft spell. It doesn't make any sense. And so the masses come away from it kind of scratching their head like, what does this mean? So what is that? That's confusion.
Yeah.
And then later on in their declaratory ruling, they said, if you have even one of these pigs, it could cost you $10,000. It could. So confusion and then fear.
Yeah.
Right. And then when we contacted them, and they had a meeting that we could all drive to, and sit in on the meeting, and they played a lot of games there. But when we asked them to clarify this in person, no, they're not going to do that. You just have to read the spell.
You read the spell.
Yeah.
And conjure your mind into believing that they have a power that they do not have.
Right.
That's what it came down to. And basically what it said was, any pig that we decide for any reason that you can't have, you can't have.
That's it.
That's the no bullshit version of the spell. Well, of course, if you put it down that way, then people get angry, right? Oh, yeah. But like if you put it under the auspice of we're trying to protect the environment, your pig could cause global warming. He could get out, get into a Humvee, and just rev the engine till all the fuel's gone, just to warm the planet. That could happen. We don't know. Science hasn't determined that yet, but it could happen. So anything we ever determine at any time, at any place ever to fall under this can cost you $10,000 a pig. You better get the properly approved Michigan DNR pig. Yeah. Which also might someday not be approved because the science might change.
Well, here's something else. This good information for people to know. This is one of their operating methods. Yeah. Like the Department of Natural Resources, Department of Agriculture, any department is privately held. People need to know that. It's not government. They're like contractors. You know, like military uses contractors. They're the same. But they all take an oath, and their oath is to the U.S. Constitution. So that's their Achilles heel. But what they do is they tell you can't do something, and then you'll say, "Oh, I can't," and they'll say, "But if you really want to do it, we can give you a license. We can sell you a license to do it. Here's a bunch of hoops that you'll have to jump through, and once you've jumped through
through those, check you're going to have to write every year to renew your license.
Right, every year, and that's where they were going. They really wanted all pigs to be what they call under roof. They want them all to be in a factory farming setting, and get all these pesky peasant farmers get into the cities where you belong and punch that clock at the at the factory. That's their goal. That's the overall goal. And if you had told me this 10 years ago, I'd say, well, that sounds a little, conspiracy theorist, little too Alex Jones for me, My friend Dave Janda says, a little too Alex Jones for me. But now we get to this point, and looking back, now I hear the commander-in-chief say there's going to be food shortages, and I don't see the Department of Agriculture swooping into the rescue and say, okay, boys, let's get a plan together to feed all these people. Yeah. They're actually coming together and saying, we don't want you raising any chickens this year because of the bird flu. They didn't get anywhere with that.
No. I mean, if I was president, and I don't want the job, but if I'm president and my people come to me and go, there's going to be food shortages, Mr. President, I've got heads on pikes at that point. And there better be some answers as to what we're going to do about it this second, or every head comes off and I'm replacing you with new heads.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's military thinking. And we had commander in chief. Instead, we got a guy eating ice cream saying he's not worried about inflation and probably crapping his pants. So we need to have a solution. People like you and I, Mark, and I know you have an angle you're coming at this from. And part of it is that homesteading is a big part of the answer to this. So let's transition that way toward the solution, since we've hammered the problem pretty hard here. And I think we could spend a couple hours talking about things that sound conspiratorial that are now evidently not, or they're not conspiracy theories, they're conspiracy facts. But what do we do about it? And how does homesteading play a role in it?
Okay. Glad you asked me that question. We got tipped off to the answer in a court hearing that we were in, and the number two veterinarian for the state, works for the Department of Agriculture, tried to convince the jury and the courtroom and the judge and us that farming is for experts only, and you would have to have gone through the university to be an expert and to be able to handle the rigors of farming. Of course, he never farmed. And so he said, farming is not for everybody. And so we figured out what they're trying to do is they're trying to put food production in the hands of a few. And so what you learn in the military, if you wind up in an ambush, you run into the firing. You don't run away from the firing because, they're going to make sure you have a long way to run so they can shoot you in the back. You run into the firing. And so we decided that the fix on this is not to try and reason with unreasonable people. It's just to do the opposite of what they're telling us we must do. They said we all had to dispossess our pigs and leave it to the experts, to raise them in barns. So we started saying they're never going to change their tune. We have to educate the people how to farm. And at that time, this is in about 2014, there was a small group of people that were kind of interested in farming, but nothing like it is today. And so we developed this program called Anyone Can Farm, and it was sort of a dig at the Department of Agriculture, them saying that only experts can farm. And you can access a lot of information at the Anyone Can Farm experience.com, and it tells the whole story, which is really kind of interesting. And it's an effort to pass on techniques of how to farm and help people overcome what, has, I think, purposely been moved out of American society. It's like leave it to the experts all the time. So they have control of the food. That sounds a little conspiracy theorist, but that's where it is right now. Commander-in-Chief saying, hey, get used to being hungry, and you can't do anything about it.
Because you're not an expert.
You're not an expert. Yeah. So we've been teaching people the individual processes that go into farming. And then now lately, homesteading's the word that people like, and they will relate to that. Farming seems a little big and maybe kind of gross in some respects, but homesteading seems, it's a little bit more picturesque, which it can be. And nowadays, the powers that be have made it very easy sell to convince people that you probably ought to have a handle on your food supply.
Agreed.
And nobody's going to do it for you. And, it's just like anything else that you do. It's a series of steps that you take. And when you have a series of steps mastered or even pretty good at, then you're farming. And so that's what we set out to do, was to teach people how to do this. And lately it's just exploded.
Yeah, and this pattern is everywhere. And this is even probably several years ago. I'm sure it was a rerun, but my wife and I have started homeschooling our grandkids when COVID started and they all came home. We just said to our kids, because we always wanted to do it, and once they were already out of the school, so why won't we just not send them back? We already know it works now. It made it very easy. But she was watching a Dr. Phil rerun on one of the cable channels. And the reason she was watching it was about homeschooling. And one of the objections that Dr. Phil had to the homeschooling was, he goes, well, teaching is a science. Yeah. Teaching is a science. In other words, you're not qualified to teach because you don't have a special piece of paper from a special entity that was given special powers. And again, you're back to where you were saying. It's a spell. It's an incantation. I've now invoked the power of science. And I am a TV doctor with a PhD. I have a special wizard's cloak. Therefore, I must be right and you must be wrong, because only someone, gifted in the sciences has the power to invoke teaching. And obviously you're doing it wrong. And the lady he's talking to, she's like, well, I have one kid in Stanford and I got another kid that's running his own business and I got a third one coming up. And he's still bullshitting with this. Right? And she's got one kid in an Ivy League school, another kid that's a successful entrepreneur, a third one on the way up can do anything they want, but he's worried about it's not being done scientifically. Yeah. And it's the same shit. You can't farm because you're not a magical farmer. You don't have a farmer certification. You didn't go to, so-and-so Ag University or something like that. As though humans haven't been farming as peasants since as long as there's been civilization.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're nailing it. That's exactly what it is. We even offer certification through the farm, and it is sort of a jab.
You guys do? Well, I got my magic sticker.
Yeah, you get a piece of paper saying you're certified, Baker's Green Acres certification. Yeah, and it's kind of that's the way you break spells like that, is you mock them.
Yeah,
you mock them, you make fun of them, and they can't deal with that.
Can you talk about maybe a little bit about the benefits to homesteading as a lifestyle?
Oh yeah, there's lots of them. Boy, where could I? Let's just talk about health. Let's just talk about a person's health. A lot of the foods that we're buying at the stores, their primary concern when they put that food on the shelf is the bottom line, if it's going to make money. So the less that can go into that food, the better their bottom line. Health of the people that are going to eat it, they don't care about that. That's not even a concern. And then you'll have people that have come online and said, oh, our concern is the health of the people that we're serving. But a lot of times it's a pretty weak testimony that they have. But if you go to the farm and you're looking to see what your farmers are feeding, then you can get an idea of the health of the animals that you're going to be eating, the health of the produce that you're going to be getting. Look at the kids that the farmer has. If they're in pretty good shape, that's an indication too. So the health aspect is there. And I think what I've discovered is I think there's like a vacuum in the human heart or psyche, however you want to put it. And when you're creating your own food, there's just a satisfaction to it. There's a security that comes with it. There's I don't know, what would the word be? It's a confidence that comes from doing that. It's really good work, and you develop a thirst for it. Let's say you raise a pen of pigs, and then you learn how to process them, and then you learn how to make sausages, and you learn how to make hams. Then you just you go hog wild. It's like, oh, I need to know how to do this and this and this. And the homesteading world is full of processes that a person can learn. There's probably a million of them, probably a million things. And then there's opportunity for people that get into homesteading that master a process to pass it on to someone else. I mean, I live in northern Michigan, northern lower Michigan. In the Detroit area, there's 6 million people there that live on a quarter acre. And they are all convinced that I can't farm here because all I have is a quarter acre. 6 million people. That's a massive demographic. So what we've done here is we've set aside a quarter acre that has a small building on it. It was there when we got the place. And we're going to do a mock-up of a quarter acre homestead and just show how much stuff we can pack on there, how much food we can produce. And it's going to be kind of neat because we'll catalog the data that we get off of that. And 6 million, I mean, we've got a food crisis looming on the horizon, right? 6 million people in Detroit. Let's say we could get 10% of those people to put in a 20 by 40 garden in their backyard. You know how much produce that would be? Or if they would all raise 6 chickens, or, you get the idea. We want to get the masses going on this, and that way it frees us from the direction they're taking us with industrial ag. Actually is is not good. So what else? You learn how to fix things. You learn how to make things. You become, everybody's got creative talent. But a lot of times the jobs that we take, and then we're making our payments and car payments and insurance payments and stuff, it's not very creative work that we're doing, but we don't have time in the day to create. A homestead could be just like a part-time job at first. That's what I recommend. That's how I started. And then as you progress in it and you have more processes going, they start making money, then you don't need a job off farm. You can just stay home. So that's another good one too. You can stay home. Lots of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's so many components to it. There's an emotional boost, et cetera. And you were talking about how some people prefer the term homesteading over farming. And I think a lot of that has to do with motivation. If I want to feed myself and my family, I see myself as a homesteader. If I want to feed myself, my family, and my neighbors for a profit, then I start seeing myself as a farmer. I think that's the mental component in people's heads. But traditionally, people, even who did not have a cash crop, if you want to call it that, America and most of the world was made up primarily of farmers, because farming for your family is feeding a family with the land. And so then you're farming. I guess that we've kind of changed the way that word is used. If you look, we've changed it into meaninglessness in pop culture, where you buy this product and it says it's from so-and-so family farms or some shit. And there's a picture of a tractor and a sun and a little cow or a chicken. And none of that shit exists from where that food comes from. There's absolutely zero connection to reality. You know, Sanderson family farms or something, and the little pig, and the pig farm is a giant concrete building that pigs lay in a pen that can't even turn around in.
Right.
And so we've ruined, like, that's what they do. They ruin words. And I'm with you. I have people all the time saying, you know, maybe you should use this word instead. You know, because, or, you know, like, this word is tainted now. And I'm like, no, that's a perfectly good word. And I'm with you with running into the ambush. I will not let you take the word from us. You don't get to redefine words. That's 1984 shit.
Yeah.
It amazes me people do not understand that that's what you're looking at. When you start changing the meaning of words and taking away words and saying there's words you can't use anymore, that's 1984, and you're back to your sorcery shit, right? It's a spell. If you say this word, you're a bad person. You're ultra MAGA or some other nonsense. You go, what the hell is ultra MAGA? I mean, it's not pro or anti-Trump. They just say this is a stupid made-up terminology that they've used it to another incantation to scare people.
Yeah. Well, homesteading is it's a state of mind too. You might not have all these processes going on your place right now.
Yeah.
But you could see a time where you can use any word you want and nobody can hold it over you. Like this was a perfect example during the pandemic, the plandemic. The guy at the store, the Walmart greeter guy, was telling people what they needed to do, and people complied with that.
Yes.
Why? Because they needed to get in that store to get food.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But they were complying. Like, there's two ways you comply. Like, sir, I need you to put your mask on. Okay. That's one way. Then the other way is like doing everything you were told by that guy when you came into the store, when there's no one there to do anything about it. It's the person that sits at the red light at 3:00 in the morning on the flat four-way, and you can see for a dozen miles in all directions, and there's nothing and nobody, and they wait for the red light to change because they've been psychologically conditioned to believe that light has an authority over them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people learned things, though, during the pandemic. I learned it from the struggle that I went through with the state.
Yeah.
But I learned that if you can't do anything to me, then why should I do what you want me to do if I don't want to? Right. So I would just walk past the guy and they'd take one look at me and say,
that's probably not worth it.
Yeah, we're not going to chase him into the store. And so none of these a lot of these authorities don't have the authority that we think they do, but we give it to them when we comply with them.
Yeah.
You know, one of the beauties of the American public, not all of them, but a lot of them, is they are extremely hard to govern. And our government is set up so that they are very limited in what their authority is. But we've got situations in Michigan here, like with townships actually telling people what color they're going to paint their house, you know, and people do it.
Yeah.
And that's part of farming too, and homesteading is there's a lot of perceived regulation around it, and it is just perceived. You may have somebody at a township level say, you can only have 4 chickens and no roosters.
Yeah.
But what saved us through the whole pig thing, which was big, made national news, it was a big deal. There was a lot on the line. We could have lost a lot of stuff. What saved us was the blanket of protection that you and I took an oath to protect and defend, and that is the U.S. Constitution. Now, my lawyers didn't want to go there because
That's interesting, isn't it?
it's very interesting. They wanted to argue it on whether it was void for vagueness or capricious in nature. Never mind, hey, the Fifth Amendment says that your property is your property if it's not a controlled substance, you know?
Yeah.
And but we were the ones that hit the press the test button on that Fifth Amendment, and it worked. And that's what makes this testimony from me very powerful. Is we put everything on the line to see if the Bill of Rights, the U.S. Constitution, is valid. Now, I know you get a lot of commentators that say, oh, the Constitution, it's gone, it's this. No, it is if you say it is. It is if you don't draw that sword and swing it. But it is not by any means gone. My constitutional rights are in place, and they protect me. And like in my township and in my county, even in this state, and I can back this up with really good examples. They don't mess with me because they know I know the power of the Constitution. It's not because I'm, John Rambo. It's because of my constitutional rights, and I know how to use them. And this is part of Anyone Can Farm, is to instruct people on what their constitutional rights are as pertains to growing food and living an intentional life. It's very, very powerful.
It's what I call status jujitsu, and it's if you're going to have magical incantations, they go in both directions, right? So they build their whole framework under this system. So the only way to fight that system is to turn that system back onto itself. So when you're a good martial arts practitioner, up to a point anyway, you can turn the strength of your opponent back against your opponent. So they make this magical incantation, and then you make this response to it that kind of short circuits the claim. And that doesn't, the problem is when you say it that way, like you just did, and like I just did, people get the wrong idea that the guy will show up and you'll assert this authority and then they'll go away. Well, sometimes. But sometimes you have to go in a multi-year court battle. And then that multi-year court battle is expensive. And you were fortunate to have a good community that was like, he's not in this shit alone. But for every story of a victory like that, there's 100 defeats of people that tried to do it. And so it doesn't always work. It requires a consorted and sometimes very expensive effort to get it done. But the reason it's worth doing is because this is not about Mark Baker anymore. Like what you eventually got done is beyond your own state at this point. Like it's not even just your local community. It pretty much set precedent for this, for the country.
It did.
And
it's very important that you say that, because there was one guy, and I was a unique situation. I had just gotten out of the military a few years before that, and I wasn't really getting along very well with the other children out here in the civilian
Understand?
world. So
Yeah.
I stayed home a lot, and I'm Irish, and I like to fight, I guess, I used to, and so they thought that I was just a farmer, and everyone else just complied with them. And what we would have right now, 10 years later, if I had complied, and see, this is the importance of just one guy standing up. And I'm not afraid to say this because I want all of you all to do this too in your situation.
Yeah.
Have courage. But in the declaratory ruling, they wrote in a blurb, and that blurb said, animals that are non-native species.
Okay.
Okay. So any non-native species, they said, could become feral, and that would be bad for the environment. So they gave themselves the ability later on to say that, oh, that black and white cow you got there, that Holstein,
Yeah.
that's not a native species.
No.
That was brought over from wherever.
Chickens.
And you can't have that.
Chickens,
And
right?
that was the direction they were
dogs,
going.
cats, not native.
Us.
Yeah, we're not native
Everything.
here. Yeah.
That's what they had given themselves the luxury to do. And if we had not stood up, my family and then a lot of my extended family across the country, I mean, we really had people from all over the country that stood up with us, some big name people too, and said, no, we're not going to let this happen, because if these departments get the authority to say your pig is illegal because we say so, what is next? It was a real slippery slope. And so people understood that right away. There was a lot of donations that came in. Our lawyers were kind of necessary to help us navigate the process, but they weren't in it to win. They were not in it to win. They were in it to compromise,
To bill,
and to set,
to issue invoices and bill you to represent you in court, right? Like,
right.
and to put up a plausible defense, right? Like that anybody you wouldn't get thrown, you wouldn't get disbarred for malpractice, but it doesn't mean that you're in it to win, right? Like you legitimately represented your client. Like that's another incantation. Right?
Yeah.
Legitimately represented my client according to the books. Look,
Well, they were all kind of in on it, the judge and the two lawyers, the one for the state and one that we hired, they were on a first name basis. Like we were definitely the outsiders on this, but we had a ton of support from people coming into the courtroom. But, if I had to do it over again with what I know now, and we have instructed people on how to proceed when something like this happens, and it's actually very simple. And there was a guy, you're going to know this name, Jerry Boykin, that told me, I mean, he in Jerry Boykin fashion, that what is that oath of office for if you're not going to use it? But these people that take this oath of office, it is actually a contract that they make with us, the employer. And if they step out from underneath the terms of their employment, then they can be sued for breach of contract. And anybody can look at it and say, you're going to lose. You took an oath. That's your terms of employment to protect the constitutional rights of these people. If you step out from underneath there, you are going to lose. And the people that we've instructed on this, we instruct them to send a letter of intent to sue for the person's net worth. And I don't have a problem with that.
Whatever it is.
Yeah. Like I actually lost people along the way in my 20 years of service, and they were fighting to protect and defend the Fifth Amendment. And so I think that's worth this township supervisor's net worth, and more, but that's all we can take from it. Yeah. And in every case, every case, they back down because they don't even want to secure a lawyer to go through the process.
Yeah.
So that will be part of this new information that's coming out, is how to navigate this and how to, regain your freedom that you have as an American citizen.
And what this makes me think is that generations of this country have been raised without the most important information they could have, like what it actually means to live in this place, how you actually feed yourself, right? How you assert your rights, how you stand up for your rights, how to fight given the situation. Like you say, you're Irish and like to fight. You're a Central Pennsylvania Ukrainian. Like fighting was part, but like the way you fight in this situation is you don't punch the guy in the mouth. You're playing their game. The state's game is violence. The state is violence. So when you use violence, you're using their weapon of choice, and you will lose, right? So you have to know how. So with that in mind, kind of segueing a little bit again back to solutions, I find having my grandkids here for homeschooling on my little duck farm to be an amazing thing. I think kids learn things in this environment that they would never learn anywhere else. And they can be academic, they can be civic, they can also just be rooted in, like, this is where food comes from.
Yeah.
Right. I remember the first time we had our blackberries come in and my grandson was picking them, and it was like several weeks later, and we said something about blackberries came up. He goes, I'll just go pick some. I'm like, well, they're gone for the year, bud. And until he experienced that, he didn't even understand, like, this is a seasonal crop. Like, it comes and it goes. Like, we spread it out as much as we can with variety, but they're gone now, buddy. You don't get any more till next year. And, like, that's a really important lesson. How do you feel about the value of raising kids in this type of environment?
I don't think there's a better training aid for children. I really don't. You can discipline a kid on how to make their bed and clean their room a bunch of times, but it's nothing like the real life lessons that come from life and death on a homestead. Nothing like it.
Mm-hmm.
Like my kids, we had 8 kids, and one of the things that we do on this farm that kind of set us aside a little bit was processing. So we built a butcher shop, and so we butcher animals all the time, and my kids got involved with that at an early age. And so a lot of the animals that we butcher, were almost pets here for an early part of their life. But the kids, they can process that,
Yeah.
And there's no mystery to my kids where pork chops come from. No mystery at all.
And I think it's part of how they turn kids into vegans at a young age. If a kid doesn't know that,
yeah,
and all of a sudden you explain that Wilbur's turning into bacon, well, all of a sudden bacon's icky. But if a kid grew up understanding this is this animal, this is how it's raised, this is how it's cared for, this is its purpose, then when you tell them that, they go, yeah, I know, I helped make bacon. That's a much better answer than, oh my God, I got to run home and tell my parents that they're evil. They're killing the planet because they eat pigs.
Yeah. Some of my kids have opted to go to school, like in their junior year of high school, so they can play sports. And at first we thought, gee, they're going to be walking into a lot of weirdness because we've got furries in the school here and all kinds of stuff like that. But my kids haven't been
There's
brought
people
up.
out there that don't. You're going to have to Google it, guys. You're going to have to find out what that is for yourself if you don't know what furries are. Please go ahead, Mark. Go ahead. Don't tell them either. Don't tell them.
We'll look back on it fondly someday, Jack. We'll be like, that was fun, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because I don't think it'd be around long. But the kids have a foundational understanding of all the things that are around them, and they pick that up on their own being on the farm. Plus, having me and my wife as parents, it's a good opportunity to teach kids things. It's just really good. Like if the kids coming and saying good night to you, and it's 9:30 at night and it's dark outside, and you say, "Oh, did you remember to get the eggs?" "Oh no." "Do you want to use my flashlight?"
Yeah.
So they learn to be attention to detail and and be smart kids.
Yeah. My grandson this morning, since I can't really have a real pond in the ground here, I use these mixing trays for the ducks. And he moved them, and he took some initiative. I'm battling a bobcat right now, so I'm keeping them closer to the building to try to draw them out. This is a middle of the day bobcat that just saunters out in the middle of the day and takes animals.
Wow.
So he had moved them too far out. So I said, you need to move them back by the house. He had filled 2 of them. They take about a minute and a half to fill. He goes to my wife and goes, Grandma, I'm being punished. I'm like, he had to. He said, I'm working extra 3 minutes, and I'm thinking, you know what? But it's good that you learn this shit now, because someday you're going to go get a job and you're probably going to work for somebody like me. Yeah. And it's funny when you're 11. It ain't funny when you're 21.
Right.
And they learn that too, the value of a work ethic. And I think that's part of, I grew up, I guess we were homesteaders. I guess we were preppers. I don't know what you would, I was a grandson of a coal miner and the son of a bootleg coal miner in rural Pennsylvania. We had about a 1/4 acre garden. We had a small homestead. It was just where we lived. We didn't call it any of that. And I think growing up that way is why when I went to work, I naturally excelled beyond the people around me. Even at times, like you get in a certain kind of job, they're like, you need to slow down a little bit.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Kind of that union, Central PA union mentality. Like, we don't need to be done with work too soon. You're going to mess it up. I went to work for one summer. I worked for Esplenda with tree trimming for like the highway crews and stuff that. And I had a few talking tos about you're working too fast. You're too in a hurry. You need to slow down, boy. Stuff like that. But when you get into the right environment, that is an extreme advantage. Like, you will find employment that recognizes that aggressiveness of willingness to do more. And I think if you grow up in that environment, like, can I go fishing today? Well, as long as you bring something home. That's what I used to hear. Like, honest to God, like, we need some stuff done around here, but if you're going fishing, if you come back with fish, that's okay.
Yeah.
Like that, and you start thinking, well, do I think I can actually bring any home today? Because how are they going to be? Like, you actually realize there's a consequence here. Like, I'm going to get double the work tomorrow if I don't come back with something. Kids just don't grow up that way anymore in most of America. And I say this all the time, people didn't change. Behavior changed. The kids today that we talk about, we said they're weak and they can't handle things. They're the same human beings we were and our parents were. They're just in a different environment. Correct. And so we choose the environment our kids grow up in spite of the other incantation that we supposedly don't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
you can build it. And I got to tell you this. People are flocking to this lifestyle right now. They're leaving the high. Well, we were all taught, like, you want the high-end job to make as much money as you can, and no matter what the cost, make the money. Sacrifice your life, sacrifice your family life, all that stuff. Well, people are saying, hey, wait a minute, why am I doing this? This was marketed to me, but this isn't a good thing. I prefer a rural lifestyle, less money, more control of my food, less time to just goof off with the kids, or more time to goof off with the kids. And we're seeing a lot. Different caliber people are coming now too. There's the boomers that are retiring and moving to the homestead, but then there's who was after the boomers? I forget.
Gen X.
Gen X.
Gen X.
They know they're not going to have the lifestyle that I was able to accrue, and they're going right to the homestead. We see a lot of them. We train a lot of them, actually.
Yeah, and then I think millennials are heading that way too. Like, they're the ones that are really going to get hosts. Gen X, I'm Gen X. I'm not sure when you were born, but
I'm a boomer.
You're a boomer. You were born in the 60s.
1960.
Yeah, you're a boomer. You're barely a boomer. You're a tweener. You're between the second baby boom and the Xers, right? But the millennials are the kids. They're born in the 90s. They're in their 30s now. They realize, like, a lot of this promise is never coming, and they're bifurcating, in my opinion. They're going into this group that says to the government, "We want you to fix it all." You broke it, they broke it, make it right for me. And about half of them are the ones you're talking about. They're like, well, I guess I need to do something. And I think that's a general way society works. You end up with people that want, we all have problems sooner or later in our lives. And you end up with really two primary groups. Fix the problem for me, or I need to fix the problem. And those two groups during times of prosperity, if you go in kind of the fourth turning in good times, they coexist rather well, because the ones that will solve their own problems, as long as you don't take too much from them or get in their way too much and basically leave them alone, they'll make that deal and I'll go on my way and you can be useless and weak over here. Stay out of my way. When you get into hard times like we're heading into now with massive inflation, national debt, all these other problems, what happens is the people that bifurcate to the side of, I want somebody to fix it for me. Well, the people they ask to fix it for we know they have no solutions. There's nothing they can do. So they need an enemy to explain why I can't fix it for you. So it's those people over there. So now the biggest thing people like you and I simply want, I'll deal with anything if you leave me alone. Just leave me alone. Most fundamental human right there is, the right to be left alone. And you get into the point of, well, we can't allow that anymore. I have to tell you what kind of pig you can have. I have to tell you you're not allowed to be a farmer. I have to tell you teaching is and they stop leaving the other side alone. And that's when you get into a place like we are now, where there's this conflict and then complete lunacy. Like the people that won't leave us alone, now they're going, like you and I were talking offline before we started. If somebody would have told you some of this crap that's going on, like furries or drag shows for kids or whatever, like you had been like 10 years ago, you said, you are out of your freaking mind. This is America.
Yeah.
Right. That's not going to happen. But now it is. But that's that thing. And the people that you're working with and you're seeing, they're the ones that they're still on the side of, well, I'm going to do something about it. And I think it's the one thing you can do about it, because you look at successful business, any successful business that's a real world brick and mortar type business, in the end, it's a real estate business, right? McDonald's is a real estate business. It's not a hamburger business. A hamburger and the fries and the garbage food pays for real estate. McDonald's holds more real estate than any other entity other than the Catholic Church.
Right.
Worldwide, right? So every business, my father ran a used tire shop and gas station, but used tires and the gas paid for the real estate that eventually, when he left, that was where the big settlement of money and the value of the business came at the end, was this real estate that appreciated. Farming, homesteading is a real estate business, because if I can take my property and instead of having it be a hole into which I throw money, I can make it produce enough income and food for me that it's a net gain every year. Then I've now got an asset instead of a liability. And my asset is also going to provide me a place to live, a buffer from the stupidity around me if I locate it in the right place, and it becomes my little citadel. Yeah. And so I think that people are kind of snapping to that. And I think, like, we're on YouTube, just two dudes talking here, but there's a lot of stuff on YouTube, including from you and myself, of here's how you do this. And I think that the beauty of this time that we're in spite of all the lunacy, is that there's so many examples. So when somebody says, well, you can't do that, the person's like, well, I just watched 40 other people do it yesterday.
Yeah.
Right. So I know that I can. And so now we take the person that says, I need to solve a problem, and you lay out a solution and you show other people using the solution. And then they head off in that direction. And that's where I want to go with you next, because you have an initiative called Anyone Can Farm. Can you talk about how that helps new homesteaders start going down this path?
Okay, yeah, good question. Well, homesteading is a compilation of processes. So, nailing in a staple, that is a sub-process of fencing. And fencing is a sub-process of animal husbandry, because you have to keep your animals in. I'm just using that as an example. Mm-hmm. Then water distribution is a sub-process of the whole thing. Feed distribution, all these things. And people that have never done this think, well, I don't know how to do that. But I would say to them, you didn't know how to program computers either. You didn't come out of the box knowing how to do that. You had to learn that. This you can learn too. And what we're finding is, because of everything that's happening in the world And I think there's like an internal change that's going on in people. It wasn't just the Wu flu that did it. It was the build up to it, and now all the craziness that we're seeing after it, and people are finding that they want solace somehow, and they're like their subconscious is figuring out how to do it, and it's telling them get a piece of land and figure out how to homestead. So anyway, Anyone Can Farm is an effort to pass on information in little pieces. So if you don't know how to build a fence, here's a fencing course. If you don't know how to raise chickens, here's a course. And it's just me and my sons and my daughters and my wife. You don't know how to make cheese? Here you go. Here's a cheese making thing. Very preliminary. Don't know how to milk a cow? We do that. And every time we get around to it and we can make a video course on something, then we add it to the Anyone Can Farm experience .com. That's the website. And then there's a place you can go in and become a plus member. And it's 99 cents a day, I think, to do that. $15 a month, and you have access to all that information. And this is new. We didn't used to do it this way. The way we used to do it was all in person. So you had to come to Baker's Green Acres, and you had to be working right with me. You know, if you're going to butcher a pig, you had to be right there with me. And we have a lot of success with that as well, because a lot of people are willing to do the in-person classes, which are very good. But now my second son, Joe, has come back to work with us, and he's the one that's making all these videos that are appealing to the Gen Xers and putting these courses together that people can, you know, if they're members of the tribe, then they have access to that. So that's what Anyone Can Farm is in a nutshell. It's also like a community. We call it a tribe. And I like that. I got a little pushback on that at first. You know, tribe, ooh, that's making fun of Indians. No, I like Indians. You know, I like the way Indians do. Like the chief does not want his braves to fail. The chief is going to, you know, exercise tough love with his braves. Like he's going to kick them in the rear end so that they will do things right and stay motivated. I was going to name it the Klan there for a little while, but that wouldn't go over too well either, I thought.
No, don't help him, Mark.
Yeah. But it's been around now for Anyone Can Farm we're going into our 10th year. And the classes that we've been doing, we've had a pretty high level of success because, you know, having been military, I'm always trying to train up my replacement. So it's like too late for the other guys now because we've already trained too many people. And, you know, I kind of approach everything as though it's a war, right? What are they going to attack next? And we knew that they were going to attack processing, butchering. So they always look for a choke point. And we saw during the Wu flu that they shut down butcher shops. Why? Because they could. And if they can, they will, you know.
Yeah.
And so now we've got a whole bunch of people that we've trained that don't need a butcher shop. All they need is a tree limb and a knife and a .22 rifle, and they're good to go. It might not be perfect, but there's a lot of, you know, self-fortitude that comes from being able to do that. You know, it's a tough process, but it's a very necessary process.
You know, I want to expand on something you're saying there about this. Like, everybody seems to think now this whole explosion is from the whole COVIDs or whatever, and it's not. It had its genesis a long time ago, and I'm going to bring something up on the screen for people right now. This is the show notes from an episode that I did in 2013, and it was called "The Bright Future of Homesteading in America." July 24, 2013. And I'm not going to read all the bullets. I want to read two sets of sub-bullets here. Today's movement is driven by multiple factors: concerns about the future, the quality of our food, the environmental damage of big agriculture, concerns about GMOs, retaining what was lost in generations X and Y for everyone. That's the boomers and the Xers and what have you. A change in fundamental understanding of wealth, an understanding of what is actually beautiful, a desire to regain control of our lives. What will sustain the modern homesteading movement? The I can do this almost anywhere mentality, the internet and info sharing. Opposition will strengthen the movement. It is being done before an economic crisis. The problems of modern society are more evident than ever. Automation and technology will make doing it easier. The biggest reason it is simply becoming accepted by most people. Now that's 2013.
Wow.
That's also right about the time that you started doing the classes that you're talking about with Anyone Can Farm. So this was all evident. And the other thing I said in that episode was that this is different than what was done if you go back like the 1930s, this happened, but it happened in the middle of the Depression. No one had done any pre-work, or there was no ability to share it. In the 70s, people did it because of stagflation, and everybody still thought we were going to get nuked. And that's kind of another thing all over again, right? I mean, you and I remember the drills in school about getting under your desk and putting your head between your legs like that was going to save you or something. We've got a whole generation of people that grew up without that thread in their head. But to me, the big difference this time around is all this momentum was already there, and that opposition will strengthen it. Now, I could have never said what that opposition would look like, because the clown world that we're seeing it from is it is, like you said earlier, it's a movie that you don't even think anybody would really make, because no one would have believed it, what we're dealing with now. But I do think that we're in kind of this critical mass now where everybody at least knows somebody that's doing this.
Everybody knows somebody that's doing homesteading, you said?
Yeah, like everybody at least knows somebody everybody that knows somebody that's taking some part of this life and making it kind of part of their own.
Yeah.
Where like 20 years ago, you might know one weird guy that lived out in the country or something, but now it's like everybody knows somebody that's at least have a big garden in the backyard and a couple chickens. And I look at like a cook, even like the cooking shows in mainstream media. Like if you watch Guy Fieri, like he has his own little chicken coop in the backyard and all. Like it's become a cool thing, and it didn't used to be.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and there's a sense of urgency too that we didn't see before. And I got to leave that to the powers that be. They've done that. They've used fear and constantly fear. And so once you do this, a lot of that fear dissolves because it no longer affects you. It no longer has any relevance. And it wouldn't be the first time that food has been used as a weapon against people.
Again, child of Ukrainian immigrants. I can tell you all about food being used as a weapon, right?
It seems like, I mean, I'm just a spectator on this. I don't have any inside poop at all, but it seems like on the kind of the illegal communist left, it seems like they're running out of plays to me, and a lot of their people are just kind of disappearing. And I don't look at that and say, okay, well, we're going to win. I just say it doesn't really matter. I'm never going to let myself be in a position where either side can dictate to me, where I can eat and sleep. I guess I am kind of a prepper in a way, but it's just just a Boy Scout thing, really, in me.
It's a survivalist. Again, I don't let people take the word away from me, right? So I had a good friend years ago that I did some work with and did martial arts training with, named Valery Asanov. He was actually a KGB agent when the Soviet Union fell apart. And prior to working for the KGB, he was actually a Russian judo Olympian. And so this guy was a really interesting guy to talk to. And we were talking one day about the mentality of U.S. versus Russians in the Olympics and how the Russians were so dominant at the time that he was involved. He's old like us, right? And he said, you guys were trained to try to win as quickly as possible. We were trained specifically in combat sports like judo or boxing or anything like that, survive. You train to survive. If you survive long enough, then you find a way to win. Instead of trying to just go straight, because that's when you make mistakes, when you go straight for the throat, for instance. So you train with a survival mindset. How do I counter? How do I wait? How do I make my opponent impatient so that they move too quickly? And that kind of applies with what we're doing here. If you want to try to just go in and roll over everything and take over, that's their model. Again, you don't go to war with your opponent's weaponry, because then they beat you. But what we're seeing now is more and more people being strategic. Like, I'm not going to go buy a house in downtown Dallas and then bitch that they won't let me have a chicken. I live in a place right now where it's like, I can have all the chickens I want. I can do anything I want, but I'm only 25 minutes from Fort Worth. So now I'm in a defensive, like, no, you don't get to annex my little unincorporated area, right? Like, that's a much easier fight than I want to unannex myself once it's already been done. So people are being strategic. They're thinking about where they're going. They're moving to places. Like, a lot of the whole enforcement is complaint driven. So if you have a big enough place and it's surrounded by trees, then Karens don't make phone calls and you don't ever hear from anybody. I think people are switching on to this. I've been sounding the get out alarm from the I call them flashpoint cities now. I've been doing that since 2008 when I started, but I've been doing it heavily for the last 5 years. Like, when the COVID thing happened, I'm like, and the COVID and then the Black Lives Matter protests happened. I'm like, so now you know the places that are dangerous. You know the places that are going to degrade fast. You know the places that are going to go into oppression quickly. If you're there, get out. And I think people are doing that. And then you end up in a decentralized network, right, of homesteaders and farmers. And it's so beyond just the homesteading and the farming, too. It is the entire concept of, well, the more we have of each other, the less we need of them. And that is a very difficult thing to fight against. When you have a unified, centralized movement, if your movement has a official entity, right, that's the leader of all, well, you're easy to squish. When you have all these little things, the TSP community, you've got your anyone can farm tribe that you're doing, you got all these little communities all over. It's a totally different form of, I hate to use the term, but warfare. Because I feel like we're in a war. Because you come after my children, you come after my ability to choose what I eat, what goes into my body. You've declared war. I didn't.
Right.
You declared war, and I'm going to fight back, and I'm going to use the art of war. I'm not going to let you choose the time, place, and method of battle. I'm going to do all of those things so that you don't have that advantage. You're inherently larger than me. You've got more money than me, but you're also limited by again, like you talked about, your own spells and incantations.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're a mercenary force, too. They're not fighting for their homes or their families. They're just employees of, an entity like a department that is not even real. It's not even a real thing. So none of them are dedicated to what they do. But I tell you what, they get pretty raw around the collar when you publish their names.
Oh, yeah.
Where they live.
They don't
seem to have a problem with going to the newspaper and using my name and telling everybody, a lie about what I'm supposedly doing. But then when I get on the internet and I flash their picture and I say, this is where she lives.
Yeah.
Oh, they get real worried about that. They're like, I didn't sign up for this.
Yeah.
It's like the bureaucrat class, I call them the parasite class.
I agree.
They grow up with this notion that they're untouchable. And if that were true, we wouldn't, Thomas Jefferson said, when the people fear their government, you have tyranny. When the government fears the people, you have liberty. And I think the pendulum is swinging the other way now, because people are looking at government saying, hey, you were never really there for us anyway. And you live amongst us.
Yeah, what did we get out of this deal?
Yeah, what did we get out of this deal?
You got people, our age going, I spent tens of thousands of dollars to send my child to your vaulted university system. They came home hating everything that I stand for and everything that I did, and hating me and my morality, and telling me how wrong I am when I'm the one that paid for the bill so that they could go live the American dream you promised. Or you know, you got disabled veterans that are wondering why money's going to Ukraine.
Yeah.
Like, and then, so like, again, like I said, all these entities kind of coexist peacefully in good times, even though there might be that underlying resentment, but okay, you're leaving me alone and I can basically do what I want and things are okay. But now when I got to go in and get a quarter pound of meat at the store because I can't afford a pound and you won't leave me alone, that starts that pendulum going back the other way. It's the hard men, you know, hard times create strong men create good times. And it just keeps circling back around. And I think that we're on the other end of that. I was talking to my dad about this today, though, before we got on with each other. And he's talking about how it always comes back. And he was, you know, he won't use the internet. He's an older boomer, right? And he was saying about he wanted a graph of the stock market since the Depression. I'm like, I pull that right up. And he was shocked because I think you get short-term memory at a certain point, you know. And I said, Dad, you know that the time between the high point where the market crashed in 1929, it didn't hit that high again until 1964. And he was like, I did not remember that way. And I think that, like, so even though you and I are telling people times are swinging the other way, that swing can take a long time. That was 24 years, I guess, if my math's right. I don't know. I can't think in my head right now. I lost the 2 dates, but it was more than 20 years.
Yeah.
And so if we look for more than 20 years from 2022, you're like 2042 that we could be living with this. And that's why I think doing what we're talking about is so important, because what got our grandparents through the Great Depression? The very things we're talking about.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. My grandfather, one time, I found these rat traps out in the shed. Big, thick oak they used to make them out of back then, you know, and they all had these holes in them. And so I went to him, I said, what's the holes for, Grandpa? And he said, those are squirrel traps. And I'm like, what? He goes, well, you take them and you put a nail through the hole, nail them to a tree.
Yeah.
And you put peanut butter in them, you set them, and the squirrels go in and you get squirrels to eat. And I said, how'd it work? He said, really good for the first year. Because, you know, everybody did it and there weren't so many squirrels anymore. That was how, you know, but that's how they got through that, was understanding how to live off what the land provided. And I hate to say it, I think we're about to go through it again. I hope that my prophecy there from 2013 ends up being right, that we had a lot more going into this than we have in the past. Because I think a lot of people think in the Depression that, you know, everybody knew how to do all these things, and urbanization was well into by then.
Oh, for sure. There was a lot of people in breadlines that didn't know how to do stuff. I don't think it's hard for people to wrap their head around the fact that we're not always told the truth. Yeah, like we're lied to a lot. And you can call it lying, or you can just call it marketing, right? So if you eat some of the things that just grow naturally around here, and they're called weeds, they are really good to eat. Like, we live on them in the summertime, and then you put them up against the stuff that's available for sale at the store. It's no comparison. Our stuff is way better. And I'm trying to convince people around here, well, in conversations at the table, that's done intentionally. You know, if you saw lamb's quarter at the store in bunches, then people would realize, hey, you mean you can eat that stuff?
Yeah.
And it would get out of control. So they have to keep, like, food is way more profitable than, say, drugs. And drugs is a very profitable thing, you know, legal and illegal. And so the marketing that goes around food it's critical, right? You don't want these peasants to know that they can eat without us helping them, you know. And that's part of Anyone Can Farm too, is to kind of wake people's inner pioneer spirit in them, to see all the things that are available to them that are just kind of kept out of your vision. So.
Yeah. Your thing with the land course makes me think about, like, I can sum up the whole problem with our food system with a story from when I was a soldier. So I was deployed into Honduras into a place called Agawam River Valley, middle of nowhere. We were putting a 10-mile road in the middle of nowhere that didn't exist yet. And so all our food came in on a weekly basis, all our fresh food. We lived a lot on MREs, but we also had fresh food come in. And one of the things you never got actually fresh was a banana. The bananas were black by the time you got a hold of them. And what had happened is no matter where the food came from, it had to go through the APO in Miami. That would get it into Panama, and then that would get it into Honduras. And then that would come out of Sudicano Air Base eventually and either get trucked or flown into our location. So a banana doesn't travel that well. Well, right outside our talk was a banana tree with bananas on it, right? And so there's the bananas. Well, I didn't know this till we left. And we convoyed out of the north instead of the south because the road was there now. Next thing I know, we're driving through bananas. There's nothing but bananas. You can see to the horizon in all directions, and there's nothing but bananas. And one of the guys had switched on to what that place was. He said, this is a Dole banana plantation. And this is the single largest at the time, this is the 1990s, banana plantation in the world. It was 20 miles from where we were camped. Largest banana plantation in the world, black bananas. Because they had to go in this giant circle. And they were it's probably the case that we were eating bananas that were grown 20 miles from us, that were traveling thousands of miles to get back to us. And to me, that's food distribution in America, because a lot of times what's going on, you are eating food from 3,000 miles away. But the food that's being grown in your backyard is the planes are passing each other, or the trucks are passing each other on the highway, taking the food in two different directions. And it's one thing if it's coffee from Brazil and we're sending the Brazilians, I don't know, American pork. Okay, maybe the Brazilians aren't going to grow pork and we can't grow coffee. At least it's something. But I think a lot of times, like, it's literally lettuces passing each other. Like, that is food distribution in America, because whatever path will make the most money for the middleman is the path that will be taken. No one gives a shit about the farmer. The farmer we just put as a marketing logo on the bag that the lettuce comes in. But nobody really cares about the farmer. All the money is made in that distribution system. And what you're talking about is a flat model. My backyard to my plate, or my backyard to my neighbor's plate.
Yeah, well, the homesteading model, it kind of beats that all up, because everything is right here. And, it's from right here into the kitchen, where our own best customers. And I don't want people to get the idea that you can't, if you're a homestead, you can't make dollars, because we do several things on this farm that keep the lights on. We sell pigs, we butcher pigs and sell the cuts, and milk cows and sell the milk, and a lot of things that we do. There's a spell and incantation out there that raw milk is illegal. That's one of those things that they always say. And I don't know, last time I checked the controlled substance roster, it wasn't right under C4 explosive. It's not there. So how can it be illegal? It's just a rumor that gets started, and the entities that don't want, people milking 10 cows and supplying, 40 families with milk, with good raw milk, they push those spells out there, and people believe it.
And there's ways around a lot of that, because that's almost exclusively done at the state level. So then your federal constitution may not apply, but there's always ways. We had a farm we were managing in West Virginia, and West Virginia is the worst for raw milk. There's all these loopholes like cow shares and sell it as pet food. They closed all that. So we sold it as a soil amendment.
Yeah.
And we said it was the freshest soil amendment you could get.
Well, yeah. If it's truly illegal, then they wouldn't even say anything to you. They'd just clap the bracelets right on you and haul you away.
Yeah.
But, I try to explain it to people like this. If you come to our place and buy a gallon of milk, and you got it sitting on the seat, and you're riding home, and you get pulled over by a patrolman, state policeman, are you going to chuck that out the window?
No.
Then you'll get in trouble for chucking it out the window.
Garbage.
He don't care.
Litter.
He's a law enforcement officer. He doesn't care about, department of this, or department of this is little regulations that.
Yeah.
And
it's the department.
The reality is if their regulations are repugnant to the U.S. Constitution, you're not under any obligation to pay it even any attention at all.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I'm also, like I said, I'm big on if you know how to use the right words and the right way to handle things. Yeah, and the other thing is, like, who's going to enforce these laws? It is illegal in Texas to pick a deer up off the road that's been hit by a car. I have twice had cops help me put a deer in the back of my truck. Right? it's illegal. Well, if you're a game warden that got jumped up out of bed by somebody making a phone call complaining about it, you might be mad enough to write a citation for it, but it's an unenforced law. And the cops just look at it as, well, this redneck wants to take the deer home, and I don't have to worry about it laying here stinking on the side of the road in my town. Oh, hell yeah. Here, get it out of here.
Why would they care?
They don't care. And we need to stop obeying things that, number one, aren't laws. Number two, are laws that they can't enforce. And number three, are laws they don't enforce. Because a lot of things people obey. And when I say obey, I mean they do it just because you're supposed to. They don't even pretend to be laws. Like the whole, everybody should go to college thing, right? Like, well, do you have a reason? Because if you do, great. But if you don't, then maybe you shouldn't do that. Right. And there's so many things in life people do just because, well, you're supposed to, or they say because you're supposed to say it that way, or you don't say it because you're not allowed to say it that way because the blue checks will descend on you and get you canceled or whatever. And I think there's people like myself and yourself that over time we have destroyed even the myth of cancel culture. Cancel me, go ahead. Go fly. And I said this 20 years ago. I said, go. The reason I am the way I am, and I piss people off all the time, is so the people that do care about what I do and do follow me, if somebody goes to them someday and go, do you know what Jack Spirko said? They'll go, that sounds like Jack. Yeah. Go away. Don't bother me. Like we all have to start living this way. And homesteading is one way to do it. Let's finish up though. What are some key skills that you think a new homesteader really needs to focus on developing?
Ooh, good question. We address this. We do kind of a talk show a couple nights a week, and that was the question last night. I think right now, I think we're at kind of late stages. All right, yeah. I think like something could happen, and it would accelerate this food shortage, which I believe it's in the same category as the price of fuel is going to go up. Of course, the Russians invaded Ukraine, and that's a good reason to raise the price of fuel. They're going to do the same thing with food. We already see the prices way up. So we're at a late stage in it. But if a person really wanted an edge, and that's what it is. I mean, this is a fight. It's a gunfight. It's a war. You need an edge. If you're in a gunfight, you want the sun at your back. In this fight, the edge would be if you can take a live animal and turn it into table fare. I mean, you think about the people in your neighborhood. How many people there can do that? In my neighborhood, I live in a really rural area in agricultural community. Not many people can do it. It's very limited, but we can. So that puts us, in an advantageous position. So right now, because the USDA shut down so many processing plants, cattle are really cheap because, guys hold them over 1 year to the next. They can't feed them. They just want them gone, hoping things will straighten out. But if you have a butcher shop, you can go buy cattle cheap. You're not gonna starve. The food shortage can happen, but it's not going to affect you if you're the guy that has the skills to do this.
There is no food shortage. The grocery shortage. That's kind of what you're hitting. There's plenty of food. People just can't get it because they don't know how, right? So, there's not a cow shortage. There's a beef shortage. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, right. So you have to have the skills to add value. Like, what are you going to do with a chicken? If you get a chicken and you don't know how to process it, so that it doesn't have feathers and it doesn't have guts. But if you do get the feathers and the guts out of it, then it becomes a valuable, especially in a food crisis situation. If you're hungry, you'll learn how to get those feathers off of there. But it'd be better to learn that now than in a bad scenario.
So animal processing would definitely
that is the number one choke point. Yeah, Jack. That's the number one choke point that they have.
I think that's the reason that hunters tend to gravitate toward this, because we already knew how to do that before we had livestock.
Yeah.
Like if you can process a deer, it's more work and you might need some specialized equipment because they're big and heavy, but you can process a cow.
Sure.
If you can process a deer, you damn sure can process the average size pig, not your biggest pigs. They still need some extra help. But like, your 200 plus pound pig it's like doing a deer, a goat, a sheep. It's all the same. Honestly, if you can process a rabbit, you can process a deer. It's just scale. And it's not that hard, but it is if you've never done it.
Yeah.
Like you said, a lot, like you didn't know how to program a computer when you were born either, or when you were 15, you had to learn, or you had to learn how to run a spreadsheet or do whatever office task that they gave you as an adult. None of this is really that hard. I'm sitting here looking at the chickens, looking at me going, he's talking about eating us. They're looking in my window right now.
Yeah.
Y'all are lucky you're bantams. You're too small to be worth it until you stop laying eggs. Anyway, anything else? Is there any other skills you think that we might want to?
I think number 2 behind that would probably be fencing.
Okay.
Fencing is real good. That's where people get frustrated when their animals get out and cause problems for other people. And, there's a way to do things, just like flying airplanes. There's a way to do it. And if you just learn how to do it, I think training it gives a guy an edge. You get trained by somebody who knows. I'm sure you heard that when you're in the Army. If you want to stay alive around here, buddy, you listen to people who know. Don't listen to people who don't know, right? And so you listen to people who are doing a successful homestead operation and learn from them, and be prepared to pass that information on to your children and your children's friends. And like I would like to have a multi-level marketing thing, to where it spreads out and nobody can get a handle on it. And I think that's what's happening right now. They had worked real hard to put farming in the hands of a few, and they did it through the university and things like that. But now it's gotten away from them again, and we have to spread it. Decentralized is what we need to do on really everything.
Freaks out and thinks he's trying to make Amway here. The word he's really looking for is decentralized.
Yeah.
To have this, the numeric progression is what Mark's talking about, not a pyramid to make money. This is about how many people can we get doing this, and how many different ways, sharing that information and developing those skills so that it becomes ungovernable. Because that's the whole point of this is I personally find the state evil inherent, and the only reason the state is ever tolerated, the only justification would be the protection of individual rights. If you protect the individual's right, you don't have to worry about any subgroup's right. The smallest minority being the individual. But if it's going to be there, then governance needs to be by consent. The consent of the governed is a principle that this country was founded upon. And I don't think any of us, no matter how much we move toward, my brand of anarchy or what have you, have a problem with, hey, you're not allowed to steal his shit. Right? Like that is, I think the consent of the governed on that is pretty universal. You don't get to go, but what happens is I can go take Mark's pigs because I have a certain badge that I'm wearing. And that's what these people are doing. And the more we spread this, the less that becomes possible. I used to quote a movie all the time. Remember Tombstone, the one with Val Kilmer and Kurt Russell and all. And there's a point after the shootout at the OK Corral, the town marshal says, you're all under arrest. And Wyatt tells him, I don't think I'm going to let you arrest us today.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I just don't think I'm going to let you do that today. And they just walk away. And that's where we need to get, like, where people like, if somebody comes and does what they did to you, you don't just need one man standing. That worked. But wouldn't it be great if the whole town showed up and said, "Don't think so, Hoss. Don't. He's one of us. He's a town. He's feeding our town." And that's where farmers used to be in America. You didn't go mess with a farmer in a town because the town's like, get our food there. But when you disconnect those two things, now you can, that's just a guy that makes a bunch of dirt fly around or something, you know? We need to reestablish not what this country used to be, what humanity used to be. Like, we actually valued the person that fed us.
You know, I got to straighten something out there. Do you remember in the movie The Wizard of Oz? I mean, Dorothy goes through that entire process.
Yeah.
And then at the end, and she's seeking the approval of one man. She goes through the entire process. And then at the end, the good witch says, the answer is the ruby slippers. You've been wearing them the whole time. Yeah. Well, the way you said that, what you just said, you said where we need to be as a country is, and that indicates that we're not there. That indicates we're not there. However, I beg to differ. We are wearing the ruby slippers. I exercise them, you know, and it's the U.S. Constitution. Absolutely. It is the supreme law of the land, no matter what anybody says, or else I wouldn't be sitting on this farm and I wouldn't have my freedom and I wouldn't have my animals. But it is the supreme law of the land, and it is kept out of courtrooms intentionally. They like to argue about other stupid things, but you don't even have to get into the courtroom. You can just tell these regulators, run along, girls, run along. You don't have the authority here. You don't have any authority here. Run along. And then they do find out. I mean, our group, the tribe, which is a Facebook group, this people should know this too. It's the Anyone Can Farm tribe on Facebook. And you got to ask to get in. It's a private group, and we'll thoroughly vet you and then let you in. But people have had problems with regulators, both county and state, and they've gotten with us, and we tell them what they need to do. And that attention from the tribe makes the state and county regulators say, I don't think we want to fool with these people. So these people are always, these bureaucrats, this parasite class, they're always taking the path of least resistance. And when we put up resistance, it's not just, hey, screw you, get out of my face, or slam the door in their face. It is the U.S. Constitution. But you cannot pull that sword unless you download it. It's one page, the Bill of Rights, one stinking page. Read it and then live your life by it. And you've got the ruby slippers on. You do not have to be abused by this parasite class when they say, like here in this state, they try to tell you that, well, yeah, you can carry a gun in this state. You can, per the U.S. Constitution, so long as we say so. So long as we give you a permission slip. That just kills me. But anybody that's ever pushed it finds that the Second Amendment is absolute. It is absolutely absolute.
We'll
and
see.
So if you want to carry a gun, you carry a gun.
Just remember where all this all comes from. This all comes from the real authority in this country, which is, and I don't say authority is the wrong, maybe the real force in this country, which is money. So let me give you a paradigm shifting little factoid here about the Wizard of Oz. In the book, before they made the movie, the slippers were not ruby. They were silver. So Dorothy wore silver slippers and walked down the golden road to the Emerald City to meet the man behind the curtain who had no real power, but had power over everything. That entire story was about the crime of 1873, which was the demonetization of silver. So it was silver and gold leading to the Emerald City. And when they made the movie, which they literally killed Julie Garland making that movie, by the way. They said, this is a little too uncomfortable. So they changed the slippers to ruby from silver because it gave away what the story was actually about. It was the control of the country by the bankers, which were wresting control away and eventually would take full control in 1913 with the Federal Reserve Act. And a lot of the stuff we're talking about today, people think that it's all about this local entity or that local entity or this government. This is all about money and control, because if you look at the history of oligarchy, it is that you can make all the laws you want, you can control the government all you want, but if I control the money, I control everything. And so one of the things that makes what we're talking about powerful is it reduces your dependence on them for their money, their capital controls.
Yeah.
And that's something I think very few people are aware of, that subtle change was made. And so very few people have ever read The Wizard of Oz. They've all seen the movie or the remake or whatever. And that's an interesting thing. So the key was silver. The key was silver. I don't know that that's the case anymore, but the key was to have money, because silver was considered the people's money.
Yeah.
And gold was the banker's money. And so having the people's economy was the key to unlocking the power of the man behind the curtain. Isn't that wild? Why don't we learn that in school? And the reason I know shit like this, like when I was in 11th grade, I had a history teacher that probably could have been teaching at a university. He was an old Vietnam vet at the time. So he was older for the Vietnam vet generation. And he came in one day with one of the Philadelphia phone book. And he said, in this phone book, there's 3 colors of pages. There's yellow pages, it's commercial. There's white pages, that's you and me, that's residential. And there's blue pages, that's government. And he challenged us to find the Federal Reserve in the blue pages. And we couldn't find it. And we pass it around and we're all looking at it. It's got to be in there. It's a federal agency. It's in the yellow pages. Because it's not government. It's a private entity.
Yeah.
And don't ever think one person saying one thing can't make a difference, because here I am, I'm 50 years old and I'm telling that story.
Yeah.
So guys, think about what you said. Mark, this has been fun. This has been great. Give people the ways they can find out more about what you're doing again. And I'll make sure all of it's in the show notes as well for people.
Okay.
Down there in the video notes, guys, before Mark gives you this, there's a link. That's where the audio version will be about 1 hour after we finish up, not this second. And all this stuff that Mark's about to give you, I will make sure is in those audio notes for you.
Okay. The site for more of our family is bakersgreenacres.com. And that will lead you to the anyonecanfarmexperience.com. And with those two right there, you can find anything. Okay. I go on Tuesday nights and Thursday nights on YouTube, the Anyone Can Farm Experience, YouTube, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And we just have conversation about homesteading and things that are happening, how current events apply to what we're doing, what we're going through, how do we deal with it, things like that, my perspective. And then we do an interview on Thursday night. We bring in whoever that's starting to homestead and get their point of view on stuff, where I interview them. That's kind of interesting. This week I'm interviewing my youngest son. So I think that's going to be fun.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And then the Anyone Can Farm Experience has got a lot of videos on it that my son Joe has made. And if you think what we're doing is good for the country, then please share them. And I do. I think it's good for the country. I think we need to be far more sustainable than we are, self-sustainable, self-reliant, all those that makes us Americans,
Yeah. I think we need to just find who we really are as people, because one of the most fundamental reasons we're here is because we figured out how to do all this stuff generations ago. We figured out how to feed ourselves from the land, whether it was hunter and gatherers, whether it was through horticulture and agriculture. We figured it out, and the knowledge is not gone. There's more of it today than there ever was, just less people doing it. And our goal here today is to get you guys consider doing it too. Mark, thank you for being with us today.
Hey, Jack, thank you. I'm honored to be on the Survival Podcast and be talking with you. This was really fun. Highlight of my day. Thank you.
Thank you.